And welcome to the Thursday Night Tailgate. I'm Bradley Stalder, your host tonight. And with me, recurring guest, Emerson Beery of our news desk, also producer for Roto Underworld. Emerson, how are you doing tonight?
Living the dream, my friend. Ready to dive into this exciting Thursday night matchup that we were talking about. New England Patriots, Pittsburgh Steelers. Are we expecting a lot of points tonight?
Nobody's expecting a lot of points tonight. All right. We will have all the Thursday night things and your start sits right after this. So, Emerson, let's take a step back and not just look at this New England Patriots and Pittsburgh Steelers matchup, but look at the entire slate for Week 14. There are, I count them, 6 games with a total below 40 points. This is obviously the worst of them. An over-under of 30 between the Patriots and Steelers. Steelers 6-point favorites at home. The Patriots were shut out last time. They lost 6-0 to the Chargers, and now it's Bailey Zappi at quarterback. It's not necessarily do we have optimism, but what kind of players can we have optimism for in this New England offense that is just struggling to find anything on offense?
You know, I think as a whole, I think it speaks to the defense is catching up this year a little bit. Everyone's playing that too high shell safety coverage against the great quarterbacks. And then the quarterback injuries this year have been brutal. You know, we just lost Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson, Kirk Cousins. The list has been endless this year. And as we know, the backup quarterback play in the NFL is rough, to say the least. Kenny Pickett gone as well. Not that he was giving us high-level quarterback play, but I think that leaves, just with only 20 or so competent quarterbacks in the NFL, when we start losing them, you're going to get some low implied point totals. On the Patriots side of things, we don't even have Ramondre Stevenson this week. I mean, we're reaching here. The wide receiver injuries. Who are we left with here? Juju Smith-Schuster, Tyquan Thornton. It's going to be rough. I mean, I'm in 40+ dynasty leagues. I'm in 10+ redraft leagues. I looked through tonight because I always double check before the Thursday night games. I'm not starting a single Patriots player outside of one Hunter Henry start. And we talked about it before the show. That might be where we're looking this week. Red zone. Maybe, just maybe, we might see a Hunter Henry touchdown, but that's the only touchdown that I see happening tonight. And other than that, I think that's what you're banking on, touchdown or bust here for most of these players. Ezekiel Elliott, low end flex option. I think he'll get a lot of volume this week. I don't know if the Pittsburgh Steelers is a great matchup though. The offense is going to be abysmal. That's about the only 2 players I'm thinking about tonight.
Yeah, Hunter Henry, I have outside my top 20 of tight ends for right now. He's been really, really cooled off since his first 2 games this season. But on the flip side, at tight end, Pat Freiermuth, his consensus ranking on Fantasy Pros is 13th. I have him at 10th this week. I think that Mitchell Trubisky is going to be targeting a lot of Pat Freiermuth. You mentioned as well there's some optimism for Deontay Johnson. You want to talk to us a little bit about Deontay Johnson's outlook as a possible wide receiver 3?
Deontay Johnson is the target hog in this offense. He consistently gets the most volume, and him and Mitchell Trubisky, dating back to last season, have established a rapport. He's performed with Mitchell Trubisky back there at quarterback. I have a lot more hope for him than I do George Pickens. Those post routes don't connect quite as well with Mitchell Trubisky, not a great deep ball passer. So I like Deontay Johnson this week. I have him as I think I have him as my wide receiver. I have him as my wide receiver 30 this week. So I think he's startable. I think you're playing in most leagues, especially considering the bye weeks. George Pickens, wide receiver 37. I think in a lot of leagues you're starting him, a lot of leagues with multiple flex positions, but a little bit more boom and bust there. On the running side of things, it's still muddied here between Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. I'm firing up Najee Harris in some lineups this week, though. He seems to still be that lead back, still getting that early down role. I think he's looked a lot better than he did at the beginning of the season. I think the hate went a little bit too far. I know everyone loves Jaylen Warren, but I think there's a little bit more optimism on the Steelers side of the ball.
Yeah, the issue with Najee that I have is not that he's necessarily going to split the carries or that he hasn't had the juice at this point. He did not practice the few times this week. Now, maybe we chalk that up to, well, it's a short week and teams do things differently. Maybe they're managing his workload. That's a possibility, but at least it's an eyebrow raise when you don't practice multiple times coming into a short week. Wonky things happen on Thursday night, and Jaylen Warren has looked like he's had the juice, but you mentioned that they're still splitting carries. It is still right down the middle, whether it's being involved in the passing game or carrying the rock. I have Jaylen Warren right now at running back 26 and Najee Harris down at 29. So I do have Jaylen Warren ahead, but both of them outside my top 24. But you mentioned Zeke earlier. Zeke I have at 23. So back end running back to flex consideration. Of course, you're not putting him in your flex. You're moving him to your running back slot if that's what you're forced to do, because we're still playing smart football. We're getting to the end. We're going to sprint through the finish. We're not going to make silly mistakes that mess us up later on if there are injuries and whatnot. But Ruckus jumps in. He's like, my running back 2 is Warren. You can fill in the expletive. So I don't think he's messed over in any sense. It is not like the most ideal situation, because you have to think that the Patriots are not going to be airing the ball out. They're going to be running the ball, which means that it's going to be a slow clock, which means there's not going to be a ton of play, slow pace of play. And so you have to wonder if there's going to be these long sustained drives for both sides that are going to be able to get, Warren and Zeke or anyone else, enough volume to access any type of ceiling. So Warren is probably a safe floor play of like 8 to 10 points. But there's not like a 25-point performance in his range of outcomes tonight.
Yeah, that's my feeling. Sort of. I had him flip flopped. I have Najee Harris just a few spots ahead of Jaylen Warren, and just because Jaylen Warren has 3 targets in 4 of his past 5 games, the receiving work quite hasn't been there as much. And like I said, he's still taking a little bit as a backseat as a runner to Najee Harris. That could change this week. Najee Harris was on the injury report. You're right, is going to be suiting up. However, I still think Najee Harris is going to get double-digit rushing attempts in an ugly game with limited amount of plays. Does Jaylen Warren get there? Because he's explosive. I do think you're right. I do think if we're talking about safest to get over 6 or 7 points, I think you might be right. But yeah, I think it's very low ceiling, and that you can say that about everybody this week.
Well, Alexander Tochich, thanks for tuning in from YouTube. Appreciate you. We have to sit one of these running backs, and that's Raheem Mostert with Achane back, Jaylen Warren with Najee Harris dealing with his injury, but still suiting up, DeAndre Swift, who has a real tough matchup this week, Swift against Dallas, but we also saw, Dallas and Zach Charbonnet be fantasy useful against Dallas last week. But also, DeAndre Swift was not a fantasy boom last time that Philly played Dallas. And then you've got Pollard, similar scenario as Swift. Tough defense for the running back, not a boom scenario. So which one are we sitting here? Because I'll give my answer after you hear Emerson. But, this is one where there's a lot of floor scenarios for some of these running backs.
If the question is whether we're playing Gus Edwards over any of these running backs, I do like Gus Edwards over Jaylen Warren this week. So for me, I would sit Jaylen Warren. The point total is what it is. There's not going to be very many plays. There's going to be very few plays near the goal line. We're probably looking at a touchdown to get home here. So I would like to stay away from this game. Bill Belichick has a knack for phasing out poor quarterbacks like this who you can game plan against. Bill Belichick can still draw up a good defensive game plan. like we even saw last week against the Chargers. So I think points are going to be hard to come by. I would sit Jaylen Warren. It's pretty easy for me. Still got a lot of upside in Mostert, DeAndre Swift. Pollard's been playing a lot better. I'm playing Gus over Jaylen Warren this week.
Yeah, I'm going to sit Warren as well. I am looking at the rankings here. Swift at 22, Mostert at 16. Pollard is, I think, a little bit higher. Where did Pollard go? At 12. So those are subject to change like later on if I notice some things or continue to do the adjustments and research and everything. But it's clear that Warren out of those is the one that we're sitting here. And I'm not going to go out of my way to start Gus Edwards either. We saw Keaton Mitchell have some juice in the few games before the bye week. So I'm looking at Gus Edwards and saying, you know what, maybe the Baltimore Ravens are looking at the running back game and say, let's give this rookie who's shown some flashes and not only run the ball well, but has run a few routes and been targeted down the field. Let's see if we can get him involved in a more significant way. And we've already seen what the Baltimore Ravens know what they have in Gus Edwards. And this is a scenario where even if they're probably not going to lose a game if they give Keaton Mitchell a little bit more. So I think that this is a scenario where Gus Edwards is not one that I'm looking to stick into my lineup either.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Keaton Mitchell does have a lot more upside, has a lot of that juice, still just not wrestling. We might have finally seen it a little bit. I believe Keaton Mitchell had 9 rush attempts compared to Gus Edwards 8 the last time they played together. So we could be getting a little bit more down the middle here. Gus Edwards still pounding it in at the goal line this year, though. He's still getting a lot of that work. Lamar Jackson, rush attempts are down a little bit. Still one of the most run-heavy offenses in the NFL, and that's not changing considering the injuries at the wide receiver position, Mark Andrews being out for the season. I think it adds up to you. You can honestly, Gus Edwards and Keaton Mitchell are in that flex consideration there, right there.
Yeah, and one other thing to note is Lamar did not practice today. We're monitoring that situation. So if Lamar misses, they're going to lean even more heavily on these running backs, and that might lead to a Gus Edwards and or Keaton Mitchell over Warren pretty easily. But even in this case, Warren seems to be the odd man out of those 4. All right, our Ponticelli need to win this week, but also need to score between 19 and 30 points, more points than teams in front of me. So we need some upside swings. That's what he's saying. Feel like Higgins is more likely to give me a blow-up game. It's half PPR. Man, oh man.
I mean, that's tough. I mean, yeah, of course, I think Higgins is more likely to have the blow-up game. If I was going for safer floor, if I was going for 10 points, I would start Ezekiel Elliott. I think he'll get some volume. However, T. Higgins certainly has a lot more upside. We saw Jake Browning have a big performance last week. I'm not very high on T. Higgins either, but if you are shooting for the stars, if it's, you have to win, and yes, you need a blow-up performance to get ahead in the standings. Yeah, I'm fine with going with Higgins and taking that home run swing.
And this Indy secondary is vulnerable. So I would expect, and the Indy offense is humming right now. I mean, Gardner Minshew plus Michael Pittman plus Zach Moss, that's still going to get the job done when it comes to game script. So Jake Browning, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, as they improve their chemistry, this could be one of those bounce back games for T. Higgins. We've seen a couple spike weeks already from him this season. One thing we didn't even see from Zeke last year when he was handling 15 or more touches every week for Dallas was any sort of spike week scenario. And so Zeke is the safe play, but Higgins is your swing for the fences. So I agree with you, Emerson. T. Higgins is the big swing. Our Ponticelli, that's who we would go with. T. Toms, full PPR. Are we going to start Pat Freiermuth or quarterback / tight end Taysom Hill?
It took me a second. I was like, is that Tyreek Hill? Is that what he's trying to say? No, Taysom Hill. That makes way more sense.
Yeah, so the Firemouth, I am bullish on Firemouth relative to consensus this week. I have him at 10, as I mentioned earlier. The consensus has him at 13. Taysom Hill, though, is at 7, and it's really hard for me to envision a scenario where Taysom Hill is healthy and we're not starting Taysom Hill. Just the amount of volume that he's getting. Michael Thomas is out. Juwan Johnson's been dealing with injuries. The Taysom Hill is not just rushing the ball too. He's getting a couple targets each game. With Derek Carr, we're not sure what his status is going to be. Still in concussion protocol. I would be surprised. This is just me here. I would be surprised if Derek Carr suits up, given the concussion protocol and the lack of news that we've gotten of his progress through. So that would make Taysom Hill even more appealing if you can fit him into your tight end slot. I would still have Taysom Hill over Freiermuth.
Yeah, Taysom Hill missed practice today, so that's a little bit risky. I think that adds a little bit more of a question mark. However, I tend to think he suits up. I tend to think he suits up, and therefore, yes, I'm firing up Taysom Hill. I'm a little bit more in line with consensus. I have Pat Freiermuth as the tight end 14. I've just been trying to stay away from this game. I just don't think the offenses are going to get any traction here. But Pat Freiermuth is, of course, I think if I was picking rest of season outlook, I like Pat Freiermuth quite a bit. But this is going to be a tough matchup for Pat Freiermuth. So, yes, I would have Taysom Hill as well.
All right, Trev, half PPR, Josh Downs, or Ezekiel Elliott.
I'm going with Ezekiel Elliott. Josh Downs, I know we like him. I know he had some big games at the beginning of the season, but it's been rough. I believe he's had below 40 yards in 3 or 4 of his past 5 games. So it's been rough sledding for Josh Downs. So give me the safe points this week in Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, there's so much. The safety is a big part here in the half PPR realm. In full PPR, at least you might be able to eyebrow raise it a little bit with Josh Downs. But if we look at 3 of the last 4 games, 5 or fewer targets in 3 of those games. He's had 1, 2, and 5, and then 3 receptions. Like, that's not going to get it done, even though the Colts have scored 31 and 27 points, over the last 2 games. 8 catches on 18 targets as the wide receiver, 49 and 62. Something just isn't right with Josh Downs still. So I'm going with Zeke. I'm not putting him in against Cincinnati, even though that may be a good enough matchup. Like, it's not going to move the needle away for me for Downs, but his previous production is eyebrow raising. I need to see it from Downs. I need to see it back for Downs to re-enter my lineup. And Zeke with Ramondre out, we're looking at 15 to 20 touches tonight pretty safely with the touchdown equity.
Totally agreed. And, I think Alec Pierce, unfortunately, I think he was running a lot of those cardio at the beginning of the season, we like to say. I think Alec Pierce had a big game last week. We might see him usurping Josh Downs on the depth chart.
Ooh, a little spicy there, Emerson. I'm here for it. And also, y'all should be here for our data analysis tool.
All right, I want to take a moment today to talk to you about data analysis. The data analysis tool, we listen to the users. What do you want? What do you need? And we made it happen. We added popular reports like a fantasy scoring report, air yards report. And if you want to create a new report, but you don't necessarily want to look through every field, we have quick results. Hey, show me the most popular passing data. Show me the most popular rushing data, fantasy data. Done. And the thing just is much faster than it's ever been. And the report builder got a lot easier. I mean, check this out. We break it down into offense, defense. Show me just fantasy data elements. And then when you get results, hey, show me by draft year. Let's take a look at just certain players that played a certain number of snaps or a certain number of games last year. This is the tool that so many of you have been asking for, plus a bunch of dream features that Billy wanted and Cody wanted and I wanted and Dario wanted. So go to the fantasy tools section, click on data analysis, or go to playerprofiler.com/data-analysis.
That's right. Get our data analysis tool on Player Profiler. Emerson, do you want to take a moment and just talk about the news desk? Because y'all have been crushing it at the news desk. You want to talk about maybe the division that you're working on and maybe some of the players that have popped onto your radar lately?
It's funny. I've actually had the NFC East staying remarkably healthy. remarkably healthy, the NFC East. That's who I cover. So I've actually haven't written anything in like last week or two. It's just been, like I said, NFC East, Cowboys, Commanders, Eagles, all staying relatively healthy. Probably going to have to maybe get a little bit of an update on DeAndre Swift here coming up for this weekend. He's a little nicked up, but I do expect him to play. It's been a lot of fun, and there's a lot of talent on that team. Of course, I appreciate all the people getting everything out on social media. It's been a lot of fun. The chats have been great for fantasy football. Who have they gotten me on? I believe I started getting a lot of the Keaton Mitchell hype even right before it started in the preseason. It was early in the chat, but even before he broke out, I feel like the Keaton Mitchell hype was in that chat a little bit. So they gave me a little bit of a heads up on that. I wasn't on the Keaton Mitchell hype train, so I appreciate my player profiler brethren bringing that to me.
Excellent. And I just want to take a moment and show people where they can find the news, because you can click on, let's say, who is a player that we just did? Jonathan Taylor, right? Jonathan Taylor's had some updates. If it decides to load here, Jonathan Taylor, he's had some updates. I want to show y'all because it's really cool. You'll go to Jonathan Taylor, and news and media right here is right in the banner, and it'll load for us, and you'll be able to see the news blurbs about Jonathan Taylor, the most recent on Jonathan Taylor, November 28th, because he's expected to miss 2 to 3 weeks with the thumb injury. And you can even look back at past news items. So Jonathan Taylor paid and ready October 7th. We've got Jonathan Taylor returns to practice. We've got staying on the PUP. We've got a bunch of news items dating back to the summer when the news desk was launched, and Emerson's been a big part of that. So thank you, Emerson, for your work so far on this. It's been great having you and the rest of the team crushing it. Yeah, like it's been a lot of work. Over 200 articles have been put out on the news desk. And we're going to be launching some video news as well over the next couple weeks. So keep your eyes out for the news blurbs. Jack Kavanaugh's already started doing some of those, but we're going to get that moving even more in earnest over the next few weeks. So keep your eyes out for that. The videos from Player Profiler news analysts coming out, accompanying the articles that Emerson is putting out there for y'all, the fantasy goodness. Okay, let's take a look here. It looks like we've answered a lot of the start sit questions so far, probably because there's not a lot of start sit decisions to be made. Like you pretty much are stuck with Zeke as your kind of flex play. And then when we get to the wide receivers for New England, like we just keep doom scrolling on the waiver wire, right? It's Juju, it's Tyquan. Allen Robinson for Pittsburgh. Like, goodness gracious, things are looking pretty bad there. But
I also think it's they got the degens out here now. It's a lot of the casuals are out. It's the fantasy playoffs that coming up. A lot of the casuals are already done. They packed up their team. That they're watching NBA already at this point. But it's the diehards that are here right now. It's the important questions that we're answering tonight. Those who are making the playoffs.
Yes, because this is the playoff berth week. It is massive for many of us who are vying for some of the top prizes in our leagues and in the tournaments that we're playing. Because this is the last week of, for instance, one of our friends, Underdog Fantasy, their Best Ball Mania 4 tournament regular season ends at the end of this week. So make sure you guys are using promo code Underworld. That gives you 100% deposit match up to $100 on Underdog. Casey O'Brien jumps in the chat. Emerson. And Casey asks, should I drop Jaylen Warren tonight for Jerick McKinnon? There's supposedly a report about Isaiah Pacheco dealing with injury. Or should I just keep Warren for potentially next week against Indy?
We are at that point in the season where you can kind of, there's only 3 or 4 games left. If they're not going to be productive, like, the T. Higgins, the Jaylen Warren, I don't have to hang on to any of these guys at this point. However, I still am hanging on to Jaylen Warren for the upside. I'd have to see a real concrete update suggesting Isaiah Pacheco is going to miss some time before I would commit to this. Not seeing that we're not going to get that tonight, I will keep Jaylen Warren. Who knows what's going to happen? The offense isn't clicking on all cylinders in Kansas City as is, unfortunately. So it's a little bit tough to depend on Jerick McKinnon. So I'm definitely keeping Jaylen Warren.
We do have confirmation that Pacheco does have a shoulder contusion, and he did miss Wednesday's practice. But there, as you mentioned, Emerson, there's no indication of Isaiah Pacheco missing this week, and he is my very early running back 3 this week overall. So there is some optimism from Bradley about Isaiah Pacheco against Buffalo. So I understand the idea that you want to handcuff a little bit, but I don't know if Jerick McKinnon is even the piece that you want, as bad as that sounds, because he's also been dealing with injuries over the last few weeks. And even if he gets out there, we're not sure that he's going to be an effective part of this Chiefs backfield. So, there's been some deep chatter about Deneric Prince. There's, always the bowling ball of Clyde Edwards-Helaire there. So, as I said, we're not convinced that Jerick McKinnon even would be the answer if Pacheco would miss, but there is no substantial update regarding Pacheco. So, I agree with Emerson. You're going to just hold on to Warren and roll with the punches here.
Darwin Thompson, that's what this reminds me of, the hype. It just never ends. Darwin Thompson just kept coming up and coming up and coming up. The Felton to be the same exact way. Felton, whatever it is. I haven't thought about that name since the preseason, honestly, so I've already forgotten about it.
Goodness gracious. Anthony says McKinnon will be a waiver pickup sometime soon. Maybe, but I'm not convinced. Like, Pacheco has been used a lot in the passing game this season, especially relative to what we saw from his game logs last year. It wasn't until the playoffs where we started to see, Pacheco get involved in the passing game. But this year, games of 4, 6, 4, 4, 5, 4 targets, like, that's RB1-ish usage, like mid to low RB1 plus the rushing. And then you get some touchdown equity. Yeah, like Isaiah Pacheco has played very well this season and has paid off his draft stock. So, we have concerns about McKinnon, but we are very bullish on Pacheco this week. All right, Emerson. Yeah.
I was going to say, we're dying for some McKinnon here in Kansas City, though. It needs to be McKinnon time. The wide receivers have left me in a state of sadness, so I'd love to see some McKinnon. I hope you're right. It's happened in the last couple of years this way. The running game dialing up in December. I hope you're right.
One thing that bothered me, though, Emerson, and before we finish, maybe you can give some insight into this. I thought we had turned a corner with Rashee Rice. I thought that we had really turned a corner and we had seen not just a lot of targets, but explosive down the field targets. In week 12, he had played the most snaps out wide of the entire season, and he led all wide receivers in snaps among Kansas City Chiefs wide receivers. But it just felt like Rashee, they said, "Oh, this was great. We're going to pull it back a little bit." Do you think it was just a blip for week 13, or was week 12 more of the anomaly?
Week 12 was more of the anomaly. Rashee Rice, he's very good with the ball in his hands. Still has a very long way to go as a route runner, though. Very raw in that regard. A lot of the stuff is kind of in that short area. A lot of the catches are in that short area. He's been getting better, like you pointed out, but still too many catches coming in that short area of the field, like more manufactured type touches, easy just to try to get him the ball in his hands and then watch him run with it. And that's been how it is so far. So I'm a little bit worried about his overall development as a wide receiver. I'm not sure it's as far along as some people gave him credit for. However, still the top wide receiver to own in this Kansas City offense down the stretch. 9 targets, nothing to snuff. So I still think he's a large part of the game plan, especially with Travis Kelce dealing with injuries. In my opinion, Travis Kelce just doesn't quite look the same. Maybe age is playing a little bit of a factor in that too. So I still think Rashee Rice, low end, borderline wide receiver 2 the rest of the way. I'll say that. He's probably on that wide receiver 3 side, but just on that wide receiver 3 side.
Well, Emerson, it's been an absolute treat having you on. You want to give the people the drops where they can follow you and find your fantasy goodness.
I appreciate that. You can follow me at dynasty_analyst on Twitter, or X, as the Podfather likes to say. You can also Reddit, Facebook, at Emerson Berry on Facebook, all that places. I do a weekly article for the SGPN Fantasy Football Podcast, highlighting flex players that are likely to score a touchdown. I do a few podcasts a week for the Face Off Sports Network as well, covering all the goodness, waiver wire, previews, breakdowns. So feel free to check me out at any of those places.
Lots of places, lots of fantasy goodness for Emerson. I'm Bradley, and I want to make sure you guys are also checking out the Dominator on Saturdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, with my friend Billy Muzio. It's the best start-sit show in the industry. I just finished 36th this past week in the rankings contest, so that's really cool. I'm now top 30 on the season, and we've been crushing it with these start-sit questions. We last about a half hour, but really we go like 45 minutes. And we give some bonus content to our people, so check it out, The Dominator, on Saturday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern. Billy and Bradley bro it up and give you some awesome start-sit advice. Emerson, it's been an absolute treat. Thanks for tuning. Thanks for coming. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. On behalf of Emerson, I'm Bradley. Until next time, good luck with Thursday Night Football, everybody.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.